Hello everyone and welcome. We're so happy to be learning with you. Welcome to Angels Amongst Us with the lovely Rabbanit Sara Wolkenfeld. So as people come in, I will hopefully be promoting you to panelists so that we can see your lovely smiling faces, and you'll be able to unmute yourself when Rabbanit Wolkenfeld invites questions. When you're not speaking, please remember to keep yourself muted. And if you would like to ask any questions, please put them in the Zoom chat, or if you're on Facebook, put them in the Facebook comments, and I will try and bring them to the Rabbanit. Just to welcome Rabbanit Wolkenfeld, we have a lovely bio. Rabbanit Sara Wolkenfeld is the Chief Learning Officer at Safaria, an online data passionate about expanding Jewish textual knowledge for all. Sara is also a fellow at the David Hartman Center at the Hartman Institute of North America. Her previous experience includes serving as Director of Education at the Center of Jewish Life at Hillel at Princeton University, and as part of the OU's Learning Initiative on campus. She studied Talmud and Jewish law at various institutions of Jewish learning in Israel and America, including Midreshet Lindenbaum, Jerisha, Nishmat, Beit Morasha, and speaks on various Jewish topics at synagogues, schools, university communities. Sara and her family live in the Lakeview neighborhood in Chicago. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction. It's always a pleasure. I'm a very proud Jerisha alum, so it's always a pleasure to be back at Jerisha. And I'm really excited to get into this topic with you tonight. This is a little different. Often my teaching these days is related to my day job. What I want to speak about tonight is really just topics that is a topic that I've always been interested in and that I don't get to work on enough. And I'm really excited to speak with you all about angels. So I know we have probably a larger audience on Facebook than we do on Zoom right now. But for those of you who are watching or listening and want to be active, want to put something in the chat, I'd love to know just what comes up for you in the realm of Jewish texts or outside the realm of Jewish texts. I'll leave it really open when you hear about angels, because I think it's not a topic that gets talked about a lot actually in Jewish circles. And what I'm interested in exploring tonight and really throughout this series is what role angels play in our actions as Jews, in our lives as Jews. Tonight's class specifically, I'd like to think about how we as human beings might be like angels or might not be like angels. Oh, I see already there's a comment, messengers who get people pregnant. Interesting, Noah. That's your first association. That's intense. If anyone else has a first association, I'm really happy to hear it. I think for some people, they're sort of like fluffy and cute. And for other people, they're severe. Some people might have a favorite biblical story where angels come up. Most of what we're going to do tonight falls into the realm of rabbinic literature. But I am, regardless of what time period it comes from, I'm really excited to hear your associations with angels. And there's something else that I've never done before that I wanted to do to kind of celebrate the fact that I'm finally getting to teach about angels, which I haven't done before. Inevitably, when I prepare these kinds of classes, there are more sources than I can possibly put on any one source sheet, or I've spared you, right? It's only a few pages this time, and I'll try to keep to that each night that we learn about angels. And so I always have like my outtakes. I always have the sources that don't quite make it onto the sheet. And the other thing that happens, and maybe you could tell this already from the course title or the titles of the individual classes, is that all these other associations come up for me around whatever I'm teaching. And so I started many, many years ago, actually, when I was at Princeton, I started making like an outtakes source sheet. I call them my graffiti source sheets. And I never teach from them. I rarely use them for anything. They're just for me so that I have the satisfaction of collecting all the texts, even though I'm not going to get to teach all the texts. And just for fun, just because I think this is such a fun topic, because I think angels do exist all around us in popular culture, whether or not you think they really exist, or however you think that they manifest. But there's song lyrics about angels, poetry about angels, art about angels. And so I'm going to share the source sheet with you. And I'm telling you from the start that at the bottom of the source sheet, I put a link to a Google Doc, which is my angel graffiti doc. And again, I've never done this before, but I thought I would just open it up and invite you now, during the class, if you're into multitasking, after the class, in between our classes, invite you to add anything. I kicked it off with one angel-themed painting by Chagall. He painted a lot of angels, interestingly, but you could put anything you want on there. Again, poetry, text, Jewish, not Jewish, because I want to get us thinking in this mindset. I think the first step of angels among us is to think about, well, where are the angels in your Jewish life, in the music that you listen to, in the art that you consume? Where are the angels? Where are you seeing the angels? Where are you hearing about the angels? What messages have you sort of consciously or unconsciously internalized about angels? So already in the chat, Noah wrote messengers who get people pregnant, too many eyes, which I think is a really interesting association. Again, I get a lot when I talk to people with this, but like fluffy, cute little angels, the kinds that you can, like buy little statues of. So just curious to hear about where angels come up for you in life. So I'm leaving that link there. It will be on every one of the source sheets that I give out over the course of this class. And who knows, maybe we'll have something really interesting by the end. To start with, I wanted to talk about a particular source that got me interested in the topic of angels, or I don't know if it got me interested. I think somehow I always was interested, but this is maybe the source that stays with me. That was my first entree to thinking about angels. This is the Gemara in Shabbat, Kuf Yud Tet. There's a lot. Not all of Masechet Shabbat is about Shabbat as we practice it, but this is a particularly juicy section. There's a lot to teach from this stretch of Dapim. And maybe you've heard this idea before. I'm actually going to skip a little bit. Tanya Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda Omer. So there's a Breita, a source from the time of the Mishnah. Shnei malachei hasharet melavim lo la'adam be'erev Shabbat mibeit hakneset lebeito. There are two angels that accompany every person on Shabbat evening from the synagogue to their home. Echad tov ve'echad ra. One is a good angel and one is a bad angel. I think we already have some of our first information about angels. And I'll talk more about defining the term in a little bit. But I would say here you get interesting intel about angels, right? Angels can be good or bad. I don't know if we would have known that. I think the word angelic in the English language only means being good, right? I mean, someone can tell me if you think I'm wrong about that. I think when we talk about people being angelic, we mean good like an angel. The Talmud has good angels and bad angels. And the bad angels are separate from demons, which also exist in the Talmud, but there are good angels and there are bad angels. And the other thing that we know is that they get to hang out with people, at least on Shabbat, because there are two angels who accompany you home from the Beit Knesset, from Shul on Shabbat. Continuing the story, and when they get home with the person and they find that there's a lamp burning, a table set, the person's bed is made, right? They got their house ready for Shabbat successfully. Then the good angel says, may it be your will, speaking presumably to God, right? May it be your will that it will be like this for another Shabbat. Umalach ra oneh, amen, ba'al korcho. And when the good angel says that, the bad angel is forced to say amen. The imlav, if not, right, if the house is not set up for Shabbat, malach ra omer, yehi ratzon shtehel Shabbat acheret kach. In that case, the bad angel wins and gets to say, may it be your will that the next Shabbat will be just like this. And the good angel has to say, Amen, again, Baal Korcho, against his will. I've always loved this story. Some sources suggest that this is the story that is kind of foundational to the Shalom Aleichem prayer or song that many people say preceding Shabbat dinner. And that it's this idea that on Shabbat, there are angels that accompany us. And it's not reflected in the song that this is what the angels are doing. But this is, for me, like a foundational story in thinking about angels among us. To the extent that I had heard of angels growing up as a little girl, this text was it. So I'm curious to hear from you, and we'll see if we get a few comments. But I have a lot to say about what does this story tell us about the way the Gemara understood angels? What's their role in our lives? So I already started us off that angels can be good or bad, and angels can hang out with people. And those are two of the things that we get about angels in this story. Whether or not you're going to comment, you can think for a minute about what else we know about angels as a result of this story. So I'll pause for a second so you can either think quietly or chat and answer, I guess out loud at home. So another interesting thing about the angels here is that they're a little bit judgmental. The angels are judging us, right? They're there to judge us, and they are making an assessment, right? Like you either did the right thing or you didn't do the right thing, because you either line up with the good angel or you line up with the bad angel. So there's definitely a value judgment. What about God? Is there God in the story? Sort of a trick question, because I think a lot of us reading it would say, well, God is kind of implied, right? There's a religious structure here. There's Shabbat in some way. But God is not fully present in the story, except insofar as the angels seem to get to, they make a request of God. They make a request of God, and it seems that request is taken seriously, but we don't actually know for sure if it's going to be impactful, right? It's a prayer. We have other examples of prayers in the Talmud that kick off with this Yehi Ratzon formulation. So it doesn't seem that the paradigm for angelic prayer is necessarily different than the paradigm for human prayer. It's also not clear if these angels are messengers, right? It's not clear if they're like on a mission from God. It doesn't say in the story that God sent them. Although, again, from experience teaching this text, I would say a lot of people feel that it's implied, because like, why else would the angels be with you? And the other thing that I think is, I think it's implicit in the text, you can tell me if you disagree, is that angels are invisible, which might be obvious, or it might not be obvious, meaning you might have already thought that about angels, or you might not have already thought that about angels. I know I was saying it's almost funny in a way, like two weird angel friends placing bets on all the Jews, right? I do think there's something funny about the story. And I think part of what's funny about it is like the invisibility of that, right? Is that like, you can't see them, but they're always with you. And it's like a little spooky, a little funny. Again, I'm assuming from the story that they're invisible, because it doesn't say that, like, you know, the person doesn't interact with them. They're just there. And they're just sort of this, you know, like hovering presence with the person. This is one image that we can sort of take with us of what angels might do. There's such a huge range of how you could define angels and what are all the instantiations of angels. You know, certainly across Jewish literature, even across Talmudic literature, if we throw in the Bible, there's a million. We're going to be really eclectic and broad in this class, because I'm really mostly interested in each one of us finding some kind of paradigm, some kind of idea that is interesting to you and works for you. And so I've been really broad. The word malach, the word for angel, comes from sort of related to this idea of being a messenger. Some have connected it to the word for melacha, for work. So maybe they're like a messenger with a specific job. And of course, there's lots of different words for angels across, again, rabbinic literature, biblical literature. So here again, you can put your favorite angelic term in the chat if you want to. Sometimes there are different kinds of angels, like Malachei HaSharet, right, ministering angels, which is here, and also Angel Malachem. There's Srafim, Ofanim, Chayot HaKodesh, different, again, types of angels that are mentioned in the liturgy. Sometimes there are people in Tanakh referred to as Ish or Anashim, so person or man or men, and those turn out to be angels over the course of a story. So there's a lot of different words for angels, and a lot of different descriptions of angels, and how much they all overlap is not exactly clear. What I'm interested in exploring tonight is, first and foremost, this question: be an angel? ? So angels among us, but I'm really interested in, again, I was just having fun with like reassociating the word angel. So I called this particular session Walk Like an Angel. To what extent are people supposed to be like angels? Or maybe I'll say, to what extent are Jews supposed to be like angels? And we can play with whether it makes a difference, right? Are angels Jewish? Is there anything Jewish about angels? Or are there distinctly Jewish angels? Those are all questions as well. And it's really, I think, what makes this question compelling or important is a few things. First of all, when we talk about our ideal behavior, the way that we're supposed to be in the world, how do we talk about that? So there are specific mitzvot that are kind of constructed around the idea of v'halachta b'drachav, of being like God. So my question is, are we like God, or are we like the angels? If we're more like angels, does that mean we're more like God? And I'm interested in that, thinking about that paradigm. That's sort of on the angel-God side of the spectrum. On the angel-human side of the spectrum, I'm curious to think about, how are we the same as angels? How are we different from angels? And where and when do we aspire to be like the angels? Again, because I think a lot of what we do in Jewish learning and Jewish sources is we talk about the ideal way to be in the world. We talk about halachic topics, how to act, how to observe halakha. We talk about moral and ethical questions. So again, right, when we're doing those things, are we being angelic? Would you use that word to describe your behavior? Would you want somebody to use that word to describe your behavior? So let's dive into the creation story, which is, I think, the first place in the Torah, and the only one we'll have time for tonight, where this question really comes up. At the point at which God is creating humans, we read this just a few weeks ago, there's a very famous and very, for some, troubling, problematic pasuk as follows. God says, let's make humankind in our image, after our likeness. They'll rule the fish of the sea, and the birds of the sky, and they'll rule over the birds, the cattle, the whole earth, all the things. This pasuk, which is, again, the first we hear of God creating humans, is right, like, on the surface. So this is God saying, okay, I'm going to create a person. It is the subject of much discussion among commentaries, I think, first and foremost because it is this major moment in which God is creating all of humankind, but also because of this, should we say, idiosyncratic or maybe problematic even phrasing. God is speaking in the plural. You could see it as the royal we. Let us make humankind in our image, after our likeness. And actually, a lot of the commentaries, and really starting from the Midrash, starting from the early rabbinic tradition on this, kind of take the Torah to task almost. There's a Midrash, maybe I put it on here later, where Moshe is saying, wait, You want me to write what? Doesn't that seem like a bad idea, God? If you're a monotheist, if you believe that the Torah is promoting monotheism, this pasuk, surely we could find a better way to say that, right? Because na'aseh, let us make humankind, does not seem like a good idea. And so again, the commentaries are all over this. Rashi says, na'aseh adam. And so Rashi, the great medieval commentary, is picking up on this question right away. And he again sort of, gets right into this question. Even though they, right, did not assist God in creating humans. The yesh makom leminim lirdot. See, Rashi goes right there. This is a really bad pasuk to show to heretics, says Rashi. However, according to Rashi, and this is based on a midrashic tradition, what's actually happening here is that God is being humble. God is showing the value of proper conduct, as Rashi puts it. It's always good, says Rashi, when you're really, really important, to show that you care about the little guy. And you do that by consulting with those around you. Even if you're not necessarily really going to give them a vote, maybe, you still talk to them. V'im katav e'aseh adam, if God had said, I will make human, then we wouldn't learn that a person should always consult with their beit din. And so it seems that there were heavenly beings. Rashi doesn't use the word angels here, although the Midrashim are a little bit more explicit about it. There were other heavenly beings, not other gods, to be clear. Rashi is not saying that. There were other heavenly beings that God consulted with in advance of making a human. And Rashi notes that you can refute the heretics because right after it does speak in the singular. In other words, God said, na'aseh adam, God was consulting with God's counsel. But then it says, vayivra et ha'adam, that God self created human beings. So you don't have to worry about any kind of plural gods. In this view, the angels are a kind of advisory council in creation. And the question, of course, which I'll leave unanswered for now, and you're welcome to share thoughts in the chat, but we'll circle back to it as we read more of these commentaries, is why does it matter, or why might it matter in our lives in thinking about at least Rashi's conception here of what it means to be human, if the angels were consulted in our creation? Because the story is really about why, how this is a great model for our behavior. We should always consult with those who are sort of less important, lesser, but does it matter in any other way that angels were involved in our creation? Again, I'll leave that open and you can put something in the chat if you want to. Otherwise, we'll keep thinking about it. Chizkuni, moving on to a different commentary, also French Bible commentary of the 13th century, writes about this pasuk also, and he is even more explicit and really elevates the role of the angels. So B'Tselmenu, B'Tselem HaMelachim, that God is creating human beings in the image of the angels. It's nice because Rashi really solves the problem, right? B'Tselmenu Kidmutenu. Rashi is saying, well, God was sort of including the angels, but it was a little bit fake, right? God wasn't really saying our image because God isn't, there's no we there, right? It's just God is talking to the angels and consulting with them. But Chizkuni goes a step further and says, no. B'Tselmenu wasn't just like a fake, I'm consulting you. It was God saying, people will be created in the image of angels. And that's right. That's part of the role of the angels. Lily Naz is saying it creates a hierarchy. I think that the idea of hierarchy is really interesting because, I think that's exactly a question that we're going to be dealing with. Because if you envision it as a hierarchy, so hierarchies are easy in Judaism until they get hard, right? So definitely God is up here and angels are here. But my question is, where are humans? Are we lower? Are we aspiring to be like the angels? if we're lower, are we like below the angels, or are we like on our own trajectory? Like if we're building a flow chart, right, where are we on the, or not flow chart, with the word like a mind map, right? Where would you put us? So Chizkuni, I think, would say that we are on that same continuum with angels. There's God. God talks to the angels, and God says, I'm going to make human beings to be like you. And Chizkuni is very, very clear about this. B'Tselem Elokim, in the image of, I would normally translate this as God, but I'm going to actually say Elohim in this case, because I think Chizkuni, or I know that Chizkuni is really translating the word Elohim, not as God, but as divine beings, which is, I mean, Elohim can also mean judges, right? It can have other meanings in the Torah. Chizkuni actually clearly believes that that's the case based on this second comment, and says, B'dmut malachim, we are created in the image of angels. People look just like angels. Oh, this is going to complicate my assertion that the angels are invisible. I mean, maybe people look just like angels, except that angels are invisible, so you can't see them, so you wouldn't know. Or maybe people blend right in with angels, and angels blend right in with people because we look just like them. I think, just to bring this back to the story in the Gemara, this raises some complications with that story. And Chizkuni goes on to explain that sometimes when the word Elohim is used, it means, again, divine beings, heavenly beings. It does not mean God. And so the angels were not just consulted in creation. The angels were the model for what human beings should look like. And same question that I'll ask you. Again, I don't really want to answer it at this point, although I'm happy for you to suggest answers, but I don't want to push any one answer on you, but curious to think about how might this matter in our lives, right? If we're trying to, if we are created to be like the angels, does that matter? Does that do anything to our self-image as Jews, as human beings? What does it mean that we were created to look like the angels? And this is a very physical thing that Chizkuni is saying. And that's how I'm reading it, at least. Again, I'm happy to take other comments or other readings. B'Tselem Elokim, in the image of the angels. Whereas if B'Tselem Elokim means in the image of God, I think we tend to take that in a very different direction. By we, I mean rabbinic Jews, monotheists, people who believe that God doesn't have a physical form. If those are very closely held beliefs, then it's very important to say that B'Tselem Elohim, if it's in the image of God, which is how it's usually translated, then it's important to say, no. In the image of God means, I wish we were all together so you could like fill in the blank here. I'd say it means something like in the image of God is an internal thing, right? We each have a soul. We're in the image of God. It means that all human beings were created equal. B'Tselem Elohim is, I do a lot of work with organizations that are trying to distill Jewish values, and Tselem Elokim usually makes the top 10 list, right? This is a Jewish value. It's a Jewish value to believe that all human beings are created in the image of God. They have unfortunately not met Chizkuni, who does not read it that way, right? B'Tselem Elokim, in this case, I'm even saying it wrong, right? It's B'Tselem Elohim. We're all created in the image of angels, and the beings that we're supposed to be like, that we were created to be like, are angels. And if you're now thinking, but I don't really know that much about angels, this is a problem if you read the verse the way that Chizkuni does, right? We need to learn a little bit about angels. Noah says, if we look like angels or tools of the divine sovereign, that almost seems nefarious in a way. If we look like creatures that obey but have free will. Interesting. The question of angelic obedience is definitely something that's going to come up. And I think that that's an important aspect, actually, of what's going on here, because, or what's not going on here. It points to what's missing here, because Chizkuni, again, keeps it very, very, very physical here. When it says we're created in the image of the angels, we're created to look like the angels. We have not been told at this point anything about the behavior of angels. And again, if you take the adjective angelic as being a good thing, then I would say we would probably have to agree that people are not always angelic. But we've already learned. I mean, I'm sort of conflating time periods in different sources, but if you believe like the Gemara that there are good angels and bad angels, then anyway, we're going to have to question that meaning of angelic. a lot of these ideas, as I said, come from the Midrash. These ideas about the angels being consulted, the ideas about them being involved in this creation process, and so I don't want to read all of these just for time, but here's what the Midrash has to say about this connection between angels and humans at the moment of creation. Amar Rabbi Hoshaya, b'sha'a shebara HaKadosh Baruch Hu Adam harishon ta'u malachei hasharetz, u'bikshu lomar lefanav kadosh. Here's a different take on the story. When the Holy Blessed One created the first human being, the malachei hasharet, the angels, made a mistake, and they wanted to proclaim holy before him, before Adam. This is something that we'll talk about a little bit later on, but you might already know that the prayer of the angels, the paradigmatic prayer of the angels, is that they stand before God and say, Kadosh, 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 holy, 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 right? God is very holy. And the angels were sort of confused and wanted to proclaim holy before this first human being. It's a parable. It's comparable, says the Midrash, to a king and a governor who were together in a chariot, and the residents of the province wanted to salute the king by proclaiming Domine, like you are our king, but they didn't know which one he was. So what did the king do? He pushed the governor out of the chariot, and then they all knew that he was the governor. What's the nimshal? What's the parallel in the biblical story? Hipil alav tardema. God, if you remember the story in Genesis, puts the first human being to sleep so that God can take out the rib, etc. And as soon as Adam falls asleep, the angels are like, oh no, that's not a real holy being. That is a human being. That's something very different. As the translation here has it, they knew he was merely a man. I think this Midrash further blurs the boundaries. The angels themselves are not so sure what to make of this first non-angel, non-God creation. Is it an angel? Is it a person? They see this being, and they don't know. Did the human look like them? I would not say, did the human remind them of God in some ways? It's not clear, but somehow there was confusion. And as soon as this first human being falls asleep, they realize, oh no, this human being is just a person. Another story to kind of layer on top of that one before we pause to discuss a little bit. Also from the same Midrash, from Breshit Rabbah, at the time when God came to create Adam, the first man, the angels divided into factions. Some of them were saying, Al Yibareh, don't create the person, don't create people. Umehem omrim Yibareh. And some were saying, you should. And the source that the Midrash quotes in relying on in constructing this is a verse from Tehillim, from Psalms. Chesed ve'emet nifgashu, tzedek v'shalom nashaku. You have competing parties here. You have chesed and emet, so love and kindness and truth. You have tzedek, righteousness, and you have shalom. Chesed omer yibareh, shuhu gomel chasedim. It's almost like these attributes are stand-in for either angelic factions or angels themselves. Chesed says, loving kindness says, create the person because they'll do good things. And truth says, don't create this person because they lie all the time. And it goes on from there. What these two stories taken together tell me is that angels are confused a little bit about people right from the beginning. If you imagine, if we go back to Lily Naz's hierarchy picture, right? So I mentioned that like the hierarchy is really easy to construct until you get to people. I think that's borne out a little bit by this Midrash. Right? Up until the people come around, it's really easy. There's God at the top, and then there's angels, right? Or from the angels' perspective, there's them, and then there's God. And then these people come about, and they're in the image of God, they're in the image of angels. They don't quite fit. They're not God. They're not angels. They don't quite fit this paradigm. And from the beginning, the angels are wondering, well, what are they going to be? You're telling me they're going to be a mashup of different things. I think, Noah, you said something earlier about like sort of messengers, like carrying out a task, obedience, right? You raised the idea of obedience. well, are these people not going to be fully obedient? Because that seems a little scary. I think if you're an angel and you are obedient, that seems a little bit scary. And it's not totally clear, even to the angels, where these people are going to fall into the hierarchy. And I think that this kind of confusion, right, where do people fit in, then gets reflected in texts that talk about, that are more focused on who we are as people, who we are as Jews, of necessity, and also aspirationally. So first of all, what does it mean to be a human being? What does it mean to have a physical body? Again, maybe created to look like an angel, maybe if you're Chizkuni, but not actually angelic. And then what does it mean to be a religious human being, a religious Jewish human being, as compared to angels, set aside from angels? Again, aspirationally, when we think about our religious aspirations, where do angels play into that picture as well? Even though I know we don't have a lot of people on the Zoom, I still want to pause for questions before I go on to this next section, just because I know that the Facebook feed is being monitored also. Any questions come in? And if not, I'll go on.
No, but I have a question, if that's okay.
Sure.
I'm just really struck by how many of these things are like so embedded in our everyday tefillah, like the kedusha, and also the attributes, like the 13 attributes I recognize, and it just makes me think of like the first source, because in the first source the angels are the ones praying, and I'm just thinking about like if there's some kind of hierarchy on human prayer versus angelic prayer, and does Hashem listen more to one? Is one more important? I don't know.
Yeah,
it brings it all together.
It's a great question. I would like to talk about that more in our next session together, when we'll really talk more about the many ways in which human beings and angels are competitive. Because I think you're right. I think that a lot of these things, from our vantage point now, it sort of raises these questions. Well, if we do these things, if angels do those things, also, as you said, right, even in that first source, I mentioned that it doesn't seem, kind of if I were an angel, I think I would want the magic formula. And if this is the magic formula, okay, like maybe, but I say these things all the time, and so do you, right? Yehi ratzon, shetehei, etc. That's just a standard prayer formula, and curious whether angels get special access, or whether it's just that no, like we all pray in the same way. Are angels more likely to be listened to? I think you're right that is a really important question, and I would say that in order to be able to answer that question, and then that will bring us back to where we are in this class, in order to be able to answer that question, you need to be at the point of assuming that angels and people are in really different places, right? They're really, really fundamentally different, because we can only be in competition with each other if we assume that there are some very important differences. And then we can ask the question, does God prefer their prayer? Does God prefer our prayer? What are the differences between those prayers? So I want to move into that more next week, after we unpack these questions of kind of the continuum of, again, where are the differences between people and angels, and where are the similarities? And if I can find where I am, so there's a few sources that talk about, first of all, the differences between angels and human beings, and this one appears both in the Midrash and also in the Talmud. I quoted it to you from Bereshit Rabbah here. There's a statement that says, again, sticking with this theme of human creation, God created people with arba briot milmala v'arba milamata. There are attributes of humans that come from above and attributes that come from below. There are ways in which we're like angels, there are ways in which we're not like angels. And if you were thinking like the opposite of being like an angel is being like a person, in this midrash, the opposite of being like an angel is being like an animal. Though I think we would just say it's the animalistic side of us. It's the ways in which we as human beings are the same as other living things. So the things we have in common, we eat and drink like people, we like animals, we procreate like animals, we defecate like animals, and we die like animals. But like the angels, omed k'malachei hasharet, we stand like angels. Interesting to think about. Midaber k'malachei hasharet, we speak like angels. Yesh bo da'at k'malachei hasharet, we have judgment or intelligence the way the angels do. V'ro'eh k'malachei hasharet, and we can see as the ministering angels do, which I know I like that statement as a standalone. The Midrash goes on to suggest that maybe seeing like the ministering angels is about having peripheral vision, which is, I think, also very fun to think about. But I also like it as sort of a standalone statement, right? To think about, again, what does each of these statements mean? Because I think that these are, to some degree, actually definitional, right? You might have generated this list on your own if I asked you what's definitional to being human as opposed to another kind of animal. But that's different than saying these things make us more like angels. Right? Then we have to ask what's a little bit angelic or a little bit supernatural. What's milamala about these attributes? So again, it's the way we stand, it's the way we speak, it's about our intelligence, our mental capacity, and also about the way we see or perceive the world. And that makes us, right, this midrash situates us as kind of a little bit of a mix. We have attributes of what's below, and we have attributes of what's above. Liliana is going back to your idea about a hierarchy, right? This very clearly rounds out the hierarchy. By the way, in addition to there being all different kinds of angels, there are especially later rabbinic sources. So let's say later, the same time as the Talmud or later than the Talmud, that situate angels in a hierarchy. So there are higher level angels and lower level angels. We're not going to have time to get into that entirely, but this definitely kind of, like I said, rounds out that hierarchy and puts us squarely in the middle, but not just in the middle, but in the middle, almost like we got stuck in the middle because we have attributes of both. And if this is to be taken seriously, then when we are engaged in those things, right, the behemah things, the things that come from below, we are kind of activating that part of ourselves. And when we're engaged in those other activities, we are more like the angels. So again, if the theme is when do we act like angels, the question is, can we ever be angelic? Maybe yes, maybe under certain circumstances we can be, we are. And what's interesting, I think, if you think about religious aspirations, is that it's not clear. I would say that these things are human and not religious. So standing, speaking, having intelligence, the ability to perceive reality, to see things as they are, those are not specifically Jewish aspirations. And again, right, that question of where we're situating being like an angel on our list of religious priorities, this one really, these are like definitely things you would aspire to, or that are a big part of your human life, but I'm not sure they're particularly Jewish or religious. And I want to make sure we track the evolution of that idea. And Noah's saying that this makes you think about birds. If we led more nature-oriented lives, I think being bipedal and upright might strike us as a bit more jarring. We always laugh when cats and such do it because it seems so anti-animal. I think that is really interesting. I'm not sure. Well, right. I guess these things, I think part of what you're saying is this doesn't necessarily seem so special to us, right? Like, of course we do those things. We're human beings. I think I would take what you said, Noah, a step further. I think that it's not just that we don't always appreciate animals, I think that in situating us kind of in between, right? In between, I'll use your terminology, sort of in between the natural and the supernatural, we're maybe recognizing that we don't spend enough time, or we're not always attuned to either of those. We're not necessarily attuned to nature and to the way animals are. And so we maybe don't appreciate enough the ways in which we're not that, but also the ways in which we are that. And on the flip side, maybe if we were more tuned into angels, we would think about, or more tuned into the upper realms, as this sort of phrases it, we would think about the ways that we are the same and different from those realms as well. I think that's what I was calling the hierarchy. It's also kind of the push and pull you're describing, or I think you used the word sensitivity. That this pushes us to kind of have that that sensitivity, right? To think more about the different aspects of ourselves and how they tie us to one realm or the other. And there are a few things that human beings do. Right. Well, so these are the things that human beings do that kind of maybe tie us to angels. There are a few, I'd say more specifically Jewish statements that push us, or religious statements that push us in the direction of imitating angels. I have two examples here, but there are others. There are, I think, at least a few others, but I'll leave it for you as homework to think about what those are, because I want to get to a few more texts. But one, Lillian, as you already mentioned, Kedusha, right? Like the parts of prayer that resonate with us is coming from the angels. So somewhat famously, the book of Ezekiel says about angels, "V'ragleihem regel yeshara." Their feet were a straight foot. So their feet look like one foot, or angels only have one foot, or their feet are kind of glued together. You pick. Again, we'll see what pictures of angels you all put on the angel graffiti page. But so in the Talmud, Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Hanina, says, in the name of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Hamipalel tzarich sheyicha then et raglav. When you pray, and of course the paradigmatic prayer in the Talmud is the Amidah. So when you recite the Amidah, the Shemona Esrei, your feet should be aligned. Your feet should be together. And we do that to model ourselves after the angels. And again, going back to the comments that Noah's comment prompted a moment ago, I would say you could read this as we're imitating the angels. We are trying to be like them. Or you could read this as this moment of prayer is the moment when we most want to channel, or one of the moments when we most want to channel, the angelic pieces built into our psyche, the angelic pieces built into what it means to be a human. And that's really what we're tapping into when we put our feet together in the Amidah. So either we're like, sort of pretending, right? We're imitating the angels, or we're really just accessing that part of ourselves that is more angelic. If I were going to take this back to the Chizkuni, I would say, that's anachronistic, right? Chizkuni comes later, but I think that when you sort of put the ideas together, we're clearly not identical to the angels if you think the angels always have their feet together. But because we have this innate piece within us of being in some ways innately like angels, maybe being constructed to look like them in some way, we can channel them in moments of prayer. And along the same lines, the Gemara in Chagiga references this verse in Malachi, Ki siftei kohen yishmru zad v'tarai v'akshim yipihu ki malach Hashem tzvakothu. The lips of a priest guard knowledge, men seek rulings from his mouth, for he is a messenger, malach, or angel, of the Lord of hosts. And the Gemara here is discussing what they see as a problematic teacher-student relationship. Acher, the rabbi who left his Judaism, became a heretic, was the teacher of the great Rabbi Meir, who continued to learn from his trusted teacher, even though Rabbi Meir kind of stayed on the derech and stayed part of the rabbinic community even after Acher had left. And the question is, how could Rabbi Meir have learned Torah from the mouth of Acher, given that we have this statement, in quoting this verse, Im domeh harav l'malach Hashem tzakot yivakshu Torah mipihu v'im lav al yivakshu Torah mipihu. this verse, according to Rabbi Yochanan, is teaching us that you can only learn from your teacher if they're similar to an angel. And you do not seek Torah from the mouth of somebody who is not like an angel. The implication, again, in this specific context is that Acher, Rabbi Elisha ben Abuya, was not like an angel, and so how could Rabbi Meir have learned Torah from him? But I'm less concerned about the specific context and more, again, now we have tefillah and teaching Torah as these two paradigmatic moments when we expect people to tap in to that which is angelic. And it's tricky. We'll talk about, in our third class, we'll talk about intercessionary prayer, whether we get to pray to angels to help us pray to God. It's related to your question also, Lena, is that, is one type of being's prayer better than the other? Should we pray to angels or only pray to God? So it's tricky to think about what does it mean to channel angels or to feel like we're connecting with our angelic side in the moment when I would say the being that we really are trying to get close to is God. And so to kind of bridge us over to the next class, I want to spend our last few minutes going deeper into that tension between, as I wrote here, human aspirations and, let's say, angelic aspirations. Are we trying to be more human? And maybe being human has aspects of the angelic, but also aspects that are not. We also have a relationship with God, let's say, independent of the relationship that angels have with God. But then again, there's this piece about the angelic side of us that we're trying to channel versus no, we're humans and we're a different kind of being, right? We're this surprise creation that confuses the angels because we're not perfectly obedient, because we're not always going to do the right thing, because we kind of look divine in some way, right? We have this spark, but not quite there. There's a series of sugyot, there's a series of halachic texts in the Talmud that all use the same phrase to kind of compare humans and angels. We're not going to get to look at all of them tonight. We're probably not even going to get to, maybe we'll be able to quickly look at the two that I put here. I want to read the first one to you. And again, the question is, what are we saying about the relative status of human and angels in this text? So here's the text. This is from Brachot. And what we are broadly concerned about in this section of text is when under what conditions can a person recite the Shema? Because if you're maybe if you're naked or you're looking at something inappropriate, you're too close to a bathroom, right? In all these situations, maybe you can't recite Shema. And so the situation, the construct here is that a person is naked and they're in the water. Can they recite Shema or not? So, Mayim Sulin, Yoshev Behen Atzavro V'Koreh. If the water is clear, you should sit in it up to your neck and you can read Shema. The Yeshamim Ochran Baraglo. But some people say, no, you should use your foot to kind of nudge the sand or the mud at the bottom of whatever body of water you're in so that it'll muddy the water. And that way you're not in clear water, right, with your naked body sort of visible while you're reciting the Shema. But this seems like a problem because even if you're not looking at your body, the phrase literally means your heart can see your genitals, right? Meaning your whole body is together in this water. This idea that your heart is somehow implicated if your whole body is naked and you're in the water. So maybe that's totally fine. And also your heel is seeing your genitals, right? Your whole body again is implicated in this situation together. Okay, maybe parts of your body being able to see, right? Being in the same sight line, as it were. Not that your heel can see, but in theory, or sort of theoretically. But maybe sight lines are okay, but maybe if your heel is touching your genitals, right, you're crouching in the water, maybe that's a problem. Abaye and Rava disagree about this. And then skipping a little So the disagreement gets sort of played out. And the Gemara says, Rava Amar Mutar, Rava says it's permitted, meaning even if you're crouching in the water, even if some part of your body is literally touching your naked genitals while you're reciting Shema, that's okay. Why? Lo nitna Torah l'malachei hashari. Because the Torah wasn't given to the angels. This is the theme that we'll pick up with next week, because I think this really raises this question that I mentioned earlier of the tension between people and angels. And as we'll see, one of the major sources of tension between humans and angels is going to be that we got the Torah and they didn't. Why? We'll have to discuss. We got the Torah and they didn't. And the Gemara's argument here, which again comes up in a number of places in the Talmud, is, yeah, we got the Torah, they didn't. And that means in some way that we're going to have to work with what we have. That's how I would say it, right? As the Gemara is presenting it here, we have physical bodies. Nothing you can do about it. You're in the water. Yeah, some body parts are going to touch other body parts. Yeah, your one body part can, quote unquote, see another body part. If God didn't want it that way, God would have given the Torah to the angels, and God didn't. So I saw the little celebration emoji come on the screen, right? We won, and that must be religiously meaningful in some way. What it means in the context of this Gemara is that we have to set up the rules. We have to set up our religious lives in such a way that it accommodates our physical bodies. The other example, and there's a few sugyot that sort of fit into this paradigm. The other example here, which I won't have time to read through entirely, is a Gemara from Tractate Me'ila. Me'ila is what happens if you misappropriate goods that are set aside for the temple. And the Gemara talks about how you should, when you build the temple, you have to build with non-consecrated materials, right? Materials that were not yet given over to the temple, because otherwise you might have people who accidentally on purpose use the materials of the temple for their own purposes. So if you imagine, and this again comes up in a few places, you imagine you're a builder and you're building the temple, you're a construction worker, and in the middle of the day, you're going to need to stop and rest. The minute you sit down on that stone to rest for your lunch break, if that stone were already consecrated to the temple, that would be bad. You would be misusing temple property. And so we don't consecrate those stones from the beginning. We wait. But what the Gemara says about this is, again, the Torah was not given, the Torah was not given to angels, right? We have to be able to find a way so that we can, again, exist within the realm of our physical bodies. What I think is really interesting about these two sources in particular is they're sort of opposite examples, right? The first one is saying, okay, be naked. It's okay. It's okay if one part of your body sees the other part. What can we do? We have physical bodies. We're not going to change the rules of the game. We're not going to make a specific additional prohibition to accommodate those bodies. This source is saying, no, we have to actually be more careful about the way we construct the rules, right? We are going to be a little bit stricter. We're not going to let you consecrate the materials yet because which means, and with this I'll end, that there are implications to play out on both sides of this equation. There are going to be implications of the fact that we were created to be like the angels. There's this confusion aspect with the angels. There's questions of hierarchy. There's going to be competition. And again, we're going to talk about that next week. And there's also implications of the fact that we're not angels. And at the end of the day, the fact that we are not like angels exactly is going to be a major orienting piece in building out the religious rules of the game. So with that, I'll end. We'll pick up next week with talking about, again, specifically the points of competition, the points of tension between humans and angels. which brings us again sort of farther away. These sources are more about the ways in which angels and humans are kind of on a continuum. But next week we'll dig into the competition between them. And again, I'll mention for those who maybe weren't listening at the beginning, that I did link to this angel graffiti page where you're welcome to put in your favorite angel text, song lyrics, poetry, images. It's all welcome. So thank you so much. I'll stop sharing my screen. And I hope to see you all, and I hope those of you listening will hear this more next week, and I hope you'll be in touch if you have thoughts or questions before that. So thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Rabbanit Wolkenfeld. That was so interesting. I'm looking forward to next week already. And thank you to everyone who's joined us as a participant, either on Zoom or Facebook, or listening to this later. So we have a variety of classes on offer this term, over 24 for night owls and for early birds. If you're in the latter group, consider joining us at 7 a.m. Eastern tomorrow morning for a half-hour class with Dr. John Kelson, our new Chief of Education Officer. If evenings work better for you, we'd love to see you in one of our private Talmud Shiurim, the first of which starts this upcoming Thursday night at 7:30 p.m. Eastern with Rabbanit Leah Sana. And you can learn more about all these learning opportunities and try and more and at our easy registration form, 5783.drisha.org. And I'm looking forward to seeing you all next week. Thank you so much.